Great. Welcome everyone for today's session. We are in the fifth session of this Global Youth Climate Training Program, 2024 edition. And today is the first GYC Lab session. We will have an interactive workshop and we will learn today, how do I interact with a negotiator at COP? This is Agustin Ocaña, chairperson founder of the Global Youth Coalition, and I will be having you today. I'm really happy to be here again with you all. Let's see what we will learn in today's session. So the key learning outcomes, we will learn today how to explain and understand a typical workflow at COP for a negotiator, how to focus on specific areas of work to engage with the negotiators, how to improve key ideas, what format, terminology to use, and how to format briefs, what language considerations are needed. All these amazing tools we will be giving to you guys, so when you go to COP, you make the most impact ever. With me today, we have also Myrna, the GYC champ, and the agenda is we start with me saying hi to Myrna. Then we go with our youth speaker, Johny Stengel, and we continue with the amazing Mary Claire Graf, the co-founder of the Youth Negotiators Academy. And afterwards, we will be having this panel discussion with the youth delegates from Chile, Egypt, and the delegate for the UK government. We end with some questions and answers, and what you love most, the breakout rooms. Myrna, how you doing?
I'm good. I hope you're doing good, Augustine, and I hope everyone's doing good. Happy to see you all again. Today's session is kind of different because we'll be hearing from actual negotiators on the ground. So I'm so excited for that. And I'll start off by introducing our youth speaker, Johny Stengel. Johny is a youth advocate, networker, and public speaker for climate justice, mitigation, and sustainable development. He believes that in order to realize the global transition in time, we need to efficiently connect different actors and bubbles across sectors. To overcome thinking in silos, he attends diverse conferences every week and is part of several networks to increase our collective impact. After studying psychology and business and sustainable management, he started to study two masters, global energy and climate policy at SOAS University of London, as well as sustainable transition, SDGs, and agriculture at JLU University of Gießen. Most of the time, he is a lobbyist for Fridays for Future and German Zero. This year, he will attend his sixth UNFCCC conference after 3 times at COP and 2 times at the SBs. An amazing bio. We're so excited to hear from you, Johny.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited, everybody. So it's great to see so many passionate advocates here today preparing to increase our collective impact. And COP29 in Baku will, like you said, be my 6th UNFCCC conference. And over the years, I've collected some learnings about what works and what doesn't. So today I'll walk through some essential strategies for effective lobbying at COP, drawing on both my own experiences and some resources by some organizations that I have used during the last years. For example, by the Good Lobby or Swarm for Future. So first, fun fact about my slides. Every single picture that you will see now on my slides is actually a story to tell about a lobby meeting that I had at COP or SBs in Bonn. So feel free to ask questions about these pictures later. So first, next slide, please. Let's set the stage. COP is not just one event, it's a dynamic space where formal negotiations occur alongside informal meetings, side events, and discussions in pavilions, ministers, politicians, negotiators, civil society representatives. Everybody has their own agendas, often working within defined boundaries. So your job as a lobbyist is now to navigate this complex web strategically. And one critical thing is to understand that many politicians arrive at COP with a predetermined national position. They can simply change this based on new information presented by you However, this doesn't mean your lobbying efforts are in vain. You can still influence them, but it requires a nuanced approach. Rather than trying to force immediate changes in their positions, you should focus on building relationships, presenting compelling arguments, and identifying long-term opportunities for impact. Next slide, please. Before stepping into the fast-paced, complex environment of COP, one of the most important things, clear objectives. Ask yourself, what specific outcome are you trying to achieve? It's easy to get lost at COP, so it's critical to stay focused on smart goals and also identify your stakeholders. You need to know who influences whom. For instance, it might not always be effective to approach a high-ranking minister directly, but sometimes building relationship with their advisors, junior negotiators, or even representatives from the country's civil society can be a more effective route to get your message across. And pressure from media, for example, at home might also make it more difficult for a politician to ignore you. Next slide, please. Do your homework. Do research before. So effective lobbying starts actually long before you will arrive at COP. In fact, preparation is half the battle. Doing the rough research on the delegates, you need to understand their positions on climate issues, their political background, any statements they've made publicly on the subject. So this kind of research helps you. And effective lobbying begins months before you set your foot into the conference center. Next slide, please. Now that you've identified your objectives and who you need to talk to, the next step would be crafting a message that will resonate. Your message is everything at COP, where decision makers are bombarded with a lot of information, tons of information. You need to stand out with a clear, concise, and compelling message. According to advocacy experts, good messages do basically two things. They identify the problem and offer solutions. It's a lot about framing. Politicians mostly know the problem. What they really need are practical solutions. For instance, you would not say do more for renewables, but we need to adopt a progressive carbon pricing policy by 2025 that reflects the true social and environment costs for emissions according to study 1BC. So be specific and always tie your request to something they can act on. What are they responsible for? And different stakeholders have different interests, of course, and you have to change your message. Ministers and negotiators will care about things like maintaining political support back at home, meeting international commitments, or ensuring national competitiveness. And a negotiator from a small island state might be focused on adaptation or finance, for example, or someone from industrialized nation like Canada might be focused on carbon markets. Next slide. It's all about building relationships and networks, and you have to engage early for that. So it starts long before the event, building relationship with the key actors, reach out to get delegates through email, through social media, or at pre-COP events. Establishing this connection beforehand means that you won't be just another new face vying for attention. So this relationship building process is especially important because lobbying isn't about one-off conversations, but a long-term game. So you need to establish the report, become a trusted resource, and demonstrate that you're offering value. For instance, you might offer useful data, connect them to relevant experts, or even introduce them to other influential figures who can reinforce your message. So at COP, it's common to see delegates from the same country or region collaborating in informal meetings, and you have to use these moments, whether at side events, receptions, or ever at a coffee during break. You have to talk with them informally, not only formally. Next slide, please. Let's talk about what happens if you are in the meeting. Preparation is key, of course. First, building a common ground. People are more likely to be receptive to your message if they feel you're on the same team. Acknowledge the work they've done already, highlight areas where your goals align, and express a genuine interest in their perspective. This builds trust and then opens the floor for a more constructive conversation. This could be something as simple as acknowledging the hard work the delegates team has already done on climate issues, or highlighting the shared values, like we are committed to the Paris Agreement, right? And yeah, once the conversation begins, actually, remember that you need to lead. In meetings with politicians, it's easy that they dominate the discussion, they want to interrupt you, but you can also use polite interruptions if necessary, but make sure that you get your message across. For example, you could say, while they are talking, yes, exactly, and because of that, or in the interest of time, let me please highlight a new aspect now, or sorry, let me please make clear the real point of my question, which was, so yeah, using some examples like that, and at the same time be flexible. Sometimes conversations will veer off course, and that's okay if you have enough time to build a solid relationship, but be ready to adapt and take the conversations into new directions if that's where new opportunities arises. So yeah, you have to get your input, your content now in the second stage, and in the end, you need new appointments. So really summarize in the end of the meeting. Say, okay, we agreed on this. You will now help us with this contact. You will connect us with this person, and we will meet in 1 week, 2 o'clock. Next slide. Be persistent but flexible. In advocacy, it's rare to win significant policy shifts after just one interaction. So COP's a long game, stay flexible in your approach, and the persistence doesn't end at the conference. You have to do follow-ups directly after the conference, send thank you emails, summarizing all of the discussions, they will forget it, offering further collaboration and sharing additional resources. Next slide. Timing. If you talk to them, they shouldn't be busy, of course, and sometimes there are great opportunities in the discourse to influence decision makings. Really have a look at windows of opportunities. Next slide. Be a connector, not just an advocate. The key strategy that I found works pretty well is positioning yourself as someone who connects with different actors. So definitely among COP, especially from smaller delegations who don't have access to the same networks as others or resources. If you can offer introductions, resources, useful information, you're an asset. And you should also do collective lobbying. Individual voices can at COP easily get lost, but a united front, much harder to ignore. When civil society organizations, youth movements, everybody joins forces together, you can put much more pressure on policymakers. For example, collective lobby meetings like CAN International, Yango, Engo, Wingo, Demand Climate Justice Network at COP, or Network of EU Youth NGOs for Climate Action is a network that I'm part of, that you can see on the picture. So building this collective voice to build consensus, and now I'm getting closely to the end. So yeah, of course, building a coalition doesn't mean that you have to work together with people that share the exact goals with you. Sometimes the most effective alliances are those that bring together very different actors in different areas of expertise to convince even people outside your bubble. So in summary, lobbying at COP is about building relationships, knowing your audience, being strategic with your timing and message, also about working collectively and persistently to push for the change we desperately need now. And COP can feel, of course, overwhelming, but remember, your voice matters. And when we lobby effectively, we can make a real impact. So I'm looking forward to see how all of you bring your passion and advocacy to the table at the next COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johnny. That was so interesting to hear. And you're so right. It's so important to take space in COP. I'll hand off to Augustine to introduce our next speaker.
Yes, exactly, Johnny. So happy to hear your knowledge and I totally agree. The most important thing that we can do at COP is to connect with other individuals, because at the very end, as we always say at GYC, we are one. And now, after Johny, we will receive Mary Claire, who is a youth advocate and change maker and a public speaker for just transition towards sustainable development and ambitious climate action. She believes that youth and future generations are the receivers of today's decisions. Therefore, it's her goal to empower youth to take meaningful actions. To do so, Mary Claire is active in several initiatives at local, national, and international levels. In the past and the present, she initiated and led several associations and movements around climate action, sustainable development, youth and women empowerment, food system transformation, and education. This led her to participate in the Sustainable Week International, become UN Food System Summit Vice Chair on Youth, and chair the Youth Constituency YUNGO of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Through her work, she received several awards and prizes, such as the United Nations Youth Climate Champion of Switzerland. She's a counselor of the World Future Council. So please, Mary Claire, enlighten us with your knowledge. Thank you so much for always supporting GYC and our collective endeavors. Mary Claire.
Thank you so much, Augustin, and the rest of the team for inviting me, for hosting this very important session, and as you rightfully also, Johny, mentioned, for bringing us together, because I think that's our biggest strength, the collective we are having. And it's a pleasure to share with you some insights from my side, but also would, of course, love to hear from you, and I would love to meet everyone who is coming to COP. Maybe just to tell you, I'm going to be at all the 3 COPs, because this year we have one on biodiversity, one on climate, and we have one on land and desertification. So wherever you are, you can say hi to me, and I would love to engage. But yeah, so I for this topic on how to engage as negotiators, I thought about kind of giving you some slides, because I give a lot of lectures, and then I thought maybe let me share a little bit about my own story, and maybe through this explain you how these spaces work, because as you already saw from Johny's presentation, it's quite a headache. It's quite overwhelming, and not only for the first time, for the second time, but I think honestly, throughout, it can be really overwhelming. And that's why I think it's also so important to take breaks, and also to have a community which supports itself, but also ourselves, so we can also take a break. So I had an interest in climate justice for a very long time. I grew up in the Swiss mountains, and there we see the glaciers rapidly declining. And well, the first thing you do as a child is maybe kind of these WWF tips, like write the double side of the paper, turn off the light and the water. And at one point you kind of realize, like, well, that's great, but it's probably not exactly going to solve the climate crisis at hand. And that's when I personally got first at least curious about policy and politics. But well, if you're growing up in the countryside here, and you as a child talk about politics, then everyone is like, whoa, okay. First grow up, and then you can talk about politics. And I always found this so annoying, because I thought, like, I have been reading a lot about it, and I think there's something really important even we as children have to contribute. Well, fast forward, I didn't talk that much about it. I actually got really depressed about the whole topic around climate, about the future, what will happen to the ecosystem I knew so well from the mountains when everything is gone. And I assume many of you can relate to this. Today there are words for it: eco-anxiety, anxiety of the future. And I'm really glad that now we have vocabulary to actually express these distresses and fears and very strong emotions which many of us are carrying. And so over the years, I really tried to turn my negativity and this anxiety into something kind of a positive, as a drive. And this led me to engage in the nature and climate space for quite a while. And I joined an organization, Swiss Youth for Climate, which is kind of the national youth organization here in Switzerland. And then at one point, I got the opportunity back in 2017 to participate at my first COP. And you can imagine, maybe it is like the stage you are in now, when you're kind of preparing now. And back then, we haven't had such brilliant capacity building tools. So really great to see also that now we have more and more support also for people joining, and especially also between young people. and other young people from around the world, because the only things back then we got was kind of like some lectures for some senior professors who kind of talk to you about like all the great scientific part, which is crucial. And don't get me wrong, I have been studying as well science, that it's brilliant, but it's not the whole ultimative truth, right? And maybe like another young person, you can just talk to like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, what do these acronyms mean, right? And so I got like some trainings from the organization, and then I went there like with really like kind of believing I mastered the UNFCCC and I understand it all. And so I went there, and so first I joined the Conference of Youth, which was kind of like fun, and I got a little bit already like into it. So I can very much recommend, when you go there, first join the youth conference organized by Yango and the hosting organization. And then went into the COP, and I kind of like, I had a plan, I have something to say, and everyone is going to listen. Well, it was not exactly like this. Also, as Johny already pointed out. And little did I know about all the different kind of like stakeholders there. And I think the biggest distinction already, also as pointed out by Johny, they are negotiators, and they're representing the governments and the countries, and they have decision-making rights. And then on the other side, okay, speak a little bit slower. And on the other side, we have young observers, activists, and researchers, also entrepreneurs, who are coming with a lot of wisdom. And the challenge is for people who are coming without the country is to find their way in and find how they can actually lobby the negotiators, because we cannot take direct kind of decisions, or we cannot veto something. So Johny talked a lot about this already, so I will not repeat what he has been mentioning. But bottom line, my first COP was a disaster. I was really overwhelmed. I didn't understand a word. Okay, English was not my first language, but still I thought that I had to understand at least a little bit. I was completely out. I didn't contribute anything like meaningful to what was going on. And I was like, okay, has been a great experience, but I'm never ever coming back. But well, then the collective community and some friends kicked in. They got me back. I joined some calls throughout the year. I engaged more and more in Yango. And more did I learn about the structure, about the different zones, the different possibilities to engage, but also the different leverage points we as young people actually have. And I think that's so important. By being an observer, I can say certain things a negotiator might not be able to say. Johny alluded to, right? They come at the position, they cannot just go out, even if they, as individuals, really want to do so. And that's why I then also started to really engage throughout the year and kind of following these thematics, also the meetings in between, which are so crucial, and I didn't know before. And so I learned more and more. I also really would suggest that you are picking one or two topics which you're following. So don't try to, as me, kind of follow everything at the same time and believe that you're a superwoman and can do it all. Like it's not possible, because they're happening at the same time, right? So I was following the Action for Climate Empowerment, gender-related thematics, agriculture, and technology. Not all at the same time, but over my period of almost a decade of experience in the negotiation space. So like pick one or two topics and just start to follow them, stay through the negotiations. My personal tip would be to really take notes, and this really helps you to focus, but also to better understand and later on also revise what has been going on. And also what I did, I have been sending these notes to the Swiss delegation. So you can always approach your delegation and you can like request a meeting. Sometimes they even already have some civil society meetings. Some countries do not yet have this, but you can request it. You will also find the name of the national focal points on the website. So you can search UNFCCC national focal points. There will be a beautiful list. Maybe the organizer can also send this to you afterwards. And so you can literally just like email them. There's sometimes you have phone number, maybe an address. If they don't get back, maybe like send a very nice, kind reminder. And yeah, then try to engage with them. If you don't hear back, you definitely going to see them like at the COP if you're there. So you can just approach them like, hey, I'm also from Malaysia and I would really love to talk to you. Hey, I have like, even if you have been studying, for example, in Peru and you really want to engage, or maybe this Senegalese negotiator made a really brilliant input. So you can also approach them, right? They're humans like all of us. They have titles. It can be very intimidating. I know I have been there. But ultimately also, I never regretted to speak up and approach someone, but I have been regretting so often that I haven't that was basically too shy, like, oh my God, this person in a pink badge has been just walking by and I haven't opened my mouth. So really kind of like sending you also a lot of courage. I know it can be really daunting. And then Johny alluded already, like have your speaking points ready, be concise, be quick, know what you want, ask for another meeting, and so on. So I have been taking these accurate notes and I've been sending them to the Swiss delegation with some recommendations because they haven't been attending all of these negotiations. And so I told them like it would be really great to have some young people in delegation, but well, they had all the arguments why they definitely don't want to have young negotiators in their team. Fast forward 2 years later, I got a call by the presidency's office of Switzerland, who actually has been inviting me to join the Swiss delegation as the first young person. And after having a lot of imposter syndrome, which is also real in this space, which I initially rejected, and then ultimately after a lot of convincing, then accepted, I was the first young person in the Swiss delegation. And I mean, that's also like how it really goes, kind of building this relation. Don't ask me how I got there, but I definitely think my persistent engagement, that I have been taking notes, made recommendations, engaged throughout the year, really help them to understand that this is a person who does climate strikes and with Friday for Future actions on the ground, but also really understands the context. And I think that's the beauty of the balance we as young people really have, that we can dance between these different scenes, that we can go to a Climate Action Network meeting, to the Youngo meeting, to the negotiations, but never forget what is your role and what are your limitations and what is your uniqueness coming with what you're at the moment representing. Because if you confuse everyone around, it's also not going to help anyone, right? And so I became a negotiator. It was one of the most rewarding and one of the most disastrous experiences in my life. It was beautiful to sit at the table. It was disastrous to be like the only one kind of young person in the room and have absolutely no one to talk to. It has been great to understand that negotiators are also only humans and don't know everything, and sometimes also don't understand all their acronyms they're using, which was very revitalizing to hear because I felt very stupid before. But also to see a lot of inequality, not only of young people are not being there, but also women are not there, but also how the speaking time is kind of distributed and so on. And this was, especially in the second week when I had a mental breakdown, because I tried to do everything I could with my perfectionistic mindset, which was not working. And I was like, it's just really unhealthy to bring in young people without the adequate structure to really support them. And then afterwards, I was focal point for 2 years in Yango, and I really also, there's so many absolutely brilliant young people who would love to assist their delegations. And very often delegations, on the other hand, are pretty small, especially from countries who do not have the financial means to actually bring bigger delegations, which imposes a huge inequality because ultimately, if you cannot be in the room, your voice just doesn't count. If you're not there, if you don't have a seat, well, you're out, right? So you need to have this representation in the room, and you need to have this over a long period of time so you can actually make an impact. And this doesn't matter if you're a young negotiator or a more senior negotiator. So to me, it was like we need to create something which brings in young people, but not just for the sake of checking the box and say like, okay, well, we have like these 100 young people here, but we have no clue what they're doing, or kind of just showcase them. But I was like, we need to bring, and Young was already organizing the civil society space, and there's some other initiatives as well. So I was like, but what brings young people really into the negotiation generation of negotiators? What ensures that we actually have the voices of young people be heard at the table? What brings young people really into oops, I think my audio just went off. Okay, now I'm back. What brings young people to the table in a meaningful role where they can effectively contribute to what the current status is, right? And so this led me to co-found with my brilliant co-founders the Youth Negotiators Academy, which has also been mentioned by Augustine in the very beginning, with the sole purpose of really bringing young people and capacitate them and support them and give them everything they need so they don't have to go to a mental breakdown, not have to kind of like go to feeling like they are just imposters, they don't belong to the space. And just to wrap up here, so the Academy currently is training over 400 young negotiators and diplomats from over 80 countries around the world and bringing them to the Climate Cup, but also the Certification Cup. And we're super excited to launch the third program for the Biodiversity Conference, which will take place in Cali, Colombia, with the main and overarching idea to really bring in more intergenerational leadership in decision-making spaces so we can all work together from the different spaces and have a better representation on all levels, but also have the capability, have the community, have the financial and also like the backing support from back home to really drive change. And I think that's what youth leadership ultimately means. That's what intergenerational collaboration means for climate justice, and also to kind of gain trust again in this multilateral system, which can be really, really abstract and sometimes rather pushes us away than attracts us. Nevertheless, I really believe that in this moment of crisis, if we want to obey to climate justice, we need to have a multilateral system to ensure that we actually like find a way out here. And we do need the voice of young people, not only as observers, we need them there as well, but also at the decision-making table. So thank you so much, Augustine, and the rest of the team for inviting me. It's like really, really lovely. I will put my my email also in the chat box if you want to reach out to me, if you want to see me at any of the COPs. I would love to have a chat with you and hear more about your stories. Thank you so much.
Impressive, Mary Claire. Really inspiring to hear you. I was seeing Luji, how she was smiling, because it's encouraging, and we all feel projected with your story at COP. All these mental health issues that happens, and all this anxiety that we have to do something and to finally create or generate an impact. So just two things before we go with the next session of youth delegates. Mary Claire, GYC is also sending people to the biodiversity COP, but I have not had the chance to train them, so it will be great if you guys want to give us some support there. And I forgot the next thing. Yeah, don't forget, guys, that we are also sending 5 of you guys to COP 29. So don't feel free. Go and do the form that we create for you guys, because we will have to check it afterwards. So coming after this amazing session with Mary Claire, don't forget to take her email. She's really, really, really supportive. Do it. So now let me introduce you to the 3 youth delegates that will be joining us today. We will start with Amy Campbell. Amy is developing climate adaptation policy for climate disasters at Columbia University with Columbia's National Center for Disaster Preparedness. She's a Fulbright scholar at Columbia on a career break from UK government, where she was a UNCCC negotiator. Amy worked in climate policy following a climate policy track in the UK's civil service fast stream. She led a climate and environment network that set up a climate and environment career anchor, which is being rolled out across the UK government. She was selected for the program Cohort 2040 in the 2023 and has become interested in policy approach to the poly crisis we are currently living. She is currently working with the Rockefeller Foundation and National Center for Disaster Preparedness to develop climate vulnerability indices. Also is joining us today Luji Romouzy, my dear friend and the vice chairperson and co-founder of the Global Youth Coalition, just a 19 years old dentistry student. I feel like introducing a superhero right now. At 16, Luji gained recognition for her dedication for sustainable technology solutions, winning first place in the regional Tatawar Sustainable Innovation competitions. Luji's innovative microplastic filter is now being prepared to be installed in the Red Sea, in the beautiful Red Sea, and she delivered an intervention at the UN Youth Roundtable during COP27. I believe I was there, and received an ovation from Antonio Guterres, leading the establishment of the Global Youth Coalition. And now we have the second edition of this program, where Luji serves as the co-founder and vice chairperson, as I shared already. Luji is the youngest negotiator in Egypt's history, and she represents the country's youth in climate negotiations as a member of the Egyptian National Youth Advisory Committee, an official Egyptian delegation. In this role, Luji is responsible for loss and damage negotiation and focuses on the deep blue or blue economy, ocean health, and ocean nationality. Okay, and finally, last and not last, we have my champ, Genaro Godoy, the youth delegate from Chile. You might know Jen from previous sessions before this year program started, or from talking in UN meetings and so on. He's so popular, you know. He started as a climate activist involved in demonstrations and projects on ground on environmental education and agroecology, to being one of the ones that was there when the Global Youth Coalition was born back in Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. That then becoming one of the contact points for the finance markets working group of Yungo, and now recently selected as the youth negotiator for the Chilean delegation for COP29. More than that, Jen is a friend and part of the tribe that wants to save planet Earth. Please, nothing more to say. You are impressive guys. Please, take the floor.
Amazing. The energy from that introduction. Thank you so much, Augustine. Yeah, if you could throw the slides up, that would be amazing. Firstly, hi everyone. There are so many countries here. I think I saw Burundi, Hong Kong, Zimbabwe, Belgium. Wow, okay. A lot of countries. Hard to follow that. But yeah, Johny and Mary Claire summarized that very well. I think I wrote down beautiful and disastrous experience of my life, which I very much relate to from Mary Claire. If you just jump to the next slide. I just need one slide. Okay, amazing. I will be very succinct because I want to leave lots of room for Q&A. But yeah, so a little bit of background about myself. So I started my career in UK government, working on climate policy more generally. And then I was lucky enough to go to COP27, walk in a room, and there would be 30 to 40 different countries represented. And I loved the energy, and I knew that's what I wanted to go into. So then I kind of went from kind of general climate policy postings in UK government on transport decarbonisation, carbon budgets, net zero strategy, negotiations on palm oil, and then applied to be part of the negotiations team in the UK. So kind of left the youth activist space and then was part of the delegation, and then henceforth probably the most stressful and fulfilling job of my life. But yeah, so now I'm currently developing climate adaptation policy at Columbia, and I'll go back to UK government, but I'm moving more into the climate disaster space, and specifically to develop climate vulnerability indices for climate vulnerable countries like small island developing states and sub-Saharan African countries. So firstly, I want to talk about my day-to-day experience as a negotiator, because I want to be very transparent about it, and I don't think it's spoken about enough. Johny and Mary Claire definitely covered a few points in a very compelling way, but the day-to-day of the job. So I would wake up at about 4:30, 4:45 to get ready. I'd immediately read the text that came out the night before. I'd annotate it. I'd think, is this terrible? It usually was terrible. What do I need to bring up with my manager? What do I need to speak to my counterparts about? I'd exercise for like 10 or 15 minutes and just stretch. And then breakfast would typically be at about 6:30 in the morning. Then you'd be talking about work with your colleagues. We'd typically have a full delegation strategy meeting at 7 a.m. Coordination can begin as early as 8 in Dubai. We had like a 30-minute commute. You'd be reading your text and developing text on the bus. And then rooms can typically be 9 a.m. to 12 p.m, 1 to 3 p.m, 4 to 6 to 7 p.m. And the further as COP progresses, the later the negotiations go into the night, the more unpredictable the day becomes. You can be sitting around waiting for text that will come out at 5 p.m, and then the whole day gets shifted around. But days are unpredictable. They're fueled by adrenaline, checking the screens when you and your counterparts have to frantically run to the next room. Every conversation is work and intelligence gathering. By the second week, I would have had about 4 to 5 hours of sleep consistently for 2 weeks, because as a negotiator, you typically have to go to the host country about a week before for coordination and for workshops. The sheer level of exhaustion is hard to describe, because every single minute has to be utilized, speaking to my team, my manager, constantly checking WhatsApp, coordinating with counterparts, drafting texts. But it is the most exciting and fulfilling job I've ever had. So Johny mentioned this, and I think it's a brilliant point, but how do we get to the position we bring to COP? And I think this is very important when thinking about how to influence negotiators, and if you want to be a negotiator yourself. But our negotiating position as a government is largely fixed. So the UK is part of an informal negotiating group called the Umbrella Group. And the process for deciding the negotiating position we bring to a COP begins in August of that year. So say COP is in November, we're starting to develop policy in about July or August. It's a complicated process of internal fighting between ministries, pushing for the most ambitious policy position, being forced to find a compromise before we even get to COP. And it's a joke that the hardest negotiation begins within government before we even get to COP. And the point of explaining all of this is that we have to go through a cross-government negotiating process before we even get there. So it is very hard to adjust our position unless there is an exceptionally compelling case for doing so, or in the end game, which is the term used for the last 48 hours when everything starts to go haywire and we start to get to the final text. So with all of this in mind, how do you build a relationship and influence an extremely tired and stressed negotiator? And so my intuitive answer is make an impression and be specific. With the same skill set you'd be building as a negotiator and in climate diplomacy, ask very specific questions about the item I'm covering. And if you're going to lobby, make it a realistic and implementable ask. Small amendments to text, any additional topics that would move the discussion along and win more alliances. So I negotiated response measures and capacity building. Response measures is it's quite the room. It's about the negative economic implications of climate policy measures. And capacity building is what the name suggests: training, financial support, institutional capacity to meet the Paris Agreement. And so if a youth representative came up to me after a session and made a specific suggestion on the Katowice Committee on the Implementation of Response Measures, which is the workshop associated with my item, this is something that I may be able to take to HQ and digest. Ask my government card, a 15-minute chat after COP ends when I have more capacity. One of my favourite anecdotes is that I once spent 5 hours negotiating one sentence. And I think that's where the disaster element of what Mary Claire said, one sentence in 5 hours. So be very granular about the textual suggestions. What did you notice about the country dynamics? What was blocking that room? What do you think the umbrella group could have done differently? Were there any personalities you thought that were dominant? Do you have a good fact about adaptation and mitigation co-benefits that I could use? Did you notice an overlap between the EU and G77 negotiating position that I didn't notice because I was too tired? Do you know something about the AOSIS position that I don't? Is the AOSIS negotiator annoyed about something I don't know about? And how do you think that I should respond to that? Because you have the power of breadth at COP and getting a feel of the whole atmosphere, whereas I am buried in my one item and I'm very overwhelmed and very stressed. And so the overarching comment is make a positive and implementable solution. And the classic phrase that I said to Luji and Jen when we were planning this is process is substance. The UNFCCC can be incredibly tense and toxic, which is the sad reality. And you will see that if you sit in enough rooms, particularly in the last 48 hours of any COP. But there's always a way to unblock that conversation. And there's always a way to shift the dial and move the conversation forwards, because almost every country wants to leave COP with some progress. So yeah, that's my tidbit, and I will pass on to Luji or Jen.
Okay. Hi everyone. Amy, that was absolutely amazing. You literally said everything in a bombshell. Fred, I'm gonna ask for the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with tips for productive engagement with negotiators. So my very first tip, I'm gonna refer back to what Amy said. You're dealing with people who haven't slept in days, probably haven't eaten, have been neck up in the same reports for weeks, if not months, and they're just really, really, really tired and really exhausted. So you need to keep that in mind when you're interacting with them. So your interaction with them is probably not going to last more than a few minutes because they're not going to be too free to speak with you. So the first thing that we should discuss is who should you approach? Who should you go up to, speak to, and use your 2 to 3 minutes with? A lot of people make the common mistake of going to someone at the top. So a lead negotiator for a country who can't really help them because they're not free and they probably won't be able to listen to them for too long. And even if they do, they'll probably refer them to someone else. And so then the person at the top kind of becomes like a middleman and they don't have much time to do that either. So my advice to everyone here is to start from the bottom. Look for someone who has enough time to listen to you and has enough time to refer your demands and your suggestions to the people higher up through their internal meetings. So that's the first point. Second thing is to keep it short. So when you're approaching this person, as I said, they're very tired. They don't have much mental capacity to sit and listen to you talk about anything really. So don't introduce yourself for longer than 15 seconds. Quick introduction, maybe 2 sentences long. Hi, I'm Luji from Egypt. I'm working with the Youth Negotiators for Egypt. And I also do this. That's it. Don't say anything else. I promise you they're not going to remember what you say. Even if you think it's going to be really important to say stuff about yourself, they're not going to remember it. They're too tired. So what can you do if you don't have much time and people don't have enough mental capacity to listen to you? What you can do is you can network. So spot someone in the room, go speak to them, take their business card, speak with them, be friendly. Maybe if they need some water, but they don't have time to go back inside, maybe you can help them with that. Just make human connections, and then that's how they'll remember you. Unless it's very, very time sensitive and you've got 48 hours left and stuff, then okay, maybe you can start suggesting. A trick that I use is like, except from just being like friendly and kind to the person in front of you, you need to have a way for them to visually remember you. So you took their contact and you're probably going to send them an email after COP is over, but how would they remember you if they're speaking to so many people a day? What I do is I ask to take a photo with the person. We just take a quick photo, and then when I come and send the email, I attach the image and I say, hi, do you remember me? We met during this event at COP, blah, blah, blah. And then you usually get a positive response because it's not someone random. There's a photo to support you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to simplify it even more into like a step-by-step process. Prepare a specific demand. So you're going to go up to someone with something specific. Don't go up to someone and be like, oh, I know that you're the lead negotiator for this. I'm thinking that we should have more finance. That's not a good way to approach someone. They've heard the same sentence 1,000 times. So make sure that what you're asking for is realistic. It's unique and it's something that they can actually do, because exactly like Amy said, number one, they're not representing themselves, they're representing a country. And they're also like they also prepare what they're going to present months before they actually come to COP. So it's very hard to get them to change something. But if they do, then that's a win for you, I guess. So the second thing is to read the room and identify someone to approach. So for instance, I could see 2 negotiators arguing. I'm not going to go up to them in the middle of an argument or in the middle of like a heated discussion and be like, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah. You're just going to annoy them. They're already tired. So kind of read the room, make sure that it's the right situation. Also identify someone to approach, meaning know who the person is before you go up and speak to them, so that you have some context of what you're going to say to them. Third is to be friendly and to get to the point. Don't take too much time talking. Take the picture, get the contact, and get out of there. Like, follow up later on when they're done with the COP. Next slide, please. Okay, so what should you ask for, in my opinion? Well, like Johny said as well, he said that we should be very, very specific. So make sure that you've read the reports and the text well, that you're updated, that you know every single thing about it. Not every single thing, but like if you're focusing on a certain topic, make sure that you know all of the latest news and updates about that. Also remember that small wins can usually have the most impact. And what I mean by that is when you ask for something small, it's more likely to be adapted, and then you build credibility with the negotiator, and then later on you can start asking for more. But what you need to do at the beginning is to start off small and then eventually like have bigger demands that you ask them throughout the year, not just at COP. Also focus on adding something to the text and not removing, because I wouldn't usually give this advice, but in certain contexts, it's very hard to get something removed from the text. But if you have a suggestion that you want to add, something that's good, something that's like nature-based solutions, then in that context, it's very useful to just focus on adding and not removing. And then things are going to get removed later on when they see that your addition has actually been useful and it can serve as an alternative for what they have already written. So don't focus on removing, they'll do it themselves. Just focus on the alternative and adding the alternative. Another thing is to remember that a negotiator represents a country and not themselves. I'm not going to stay too long because everyone's already spoken about that. And the last thing, don't fix what isn't broken. What do I mean by that? Do not have the same ideology of a cancer cell. How a cancer cell thinks is basically growth for the sake of growth. So if you're thinking, I just want to grow, I just want to make this text better, but it doesn't really have anything wrong with it, then you're being counterproductive. So let's say that a country has pledged 30 million for like a certain fund. Don't go up to the lead negotiator of that country and be like, oh no, we actually need 32 million. It's not going to make that much of a huge difference. Your energy and your time and your research can be better focused into something else with a bigger impact. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are my suggestions for what you guys should target this year? Next slide, please. So the first one is ratification of the High Seas Treaty. So for those of you who are not familiar with what the High Seas Treaty is, it's basically an agreement that establishes marine protected areas on the high seas. And I'm not going to get into how important oceans are in the fight for climate change. I'm pretty sure you guys are educated enough to know that. But there's a huge problem with the High Seas Treaty, and that is that a lot of countries have signed it, but not enough countries have ratified it. So they've signed it, but what ratification is it's actually implementation. So that's something that I think we should be focusing on this year. Especially considering that in the High Seas Treaty, there's a goal, which is to protect 30% of like our oceans by 2030. And less than 3% of our oceans are fully protected today. So this is something that we need to focus on. And I'd advise you to target negotiators working on loss and damage for this because it's the most relevant to them. Can we go to the next slide, please? Another topic is nature-based solutions integration in urban contexts and farming contexts. There's a ton of nature-based solutions that are absolutely great. They don't require that much financing, so they're cheap compared to alternatives. And for those of you who don't know what nature-based solutions are, it's basically using nature to fix a problem in our climate. So for example, mangroves or coral reefs or seagrass or forests or wetlands, all of those are considered as nature-based solutions. And I'd advise you to target adaptation and mitigation negotiators as well as loss and damage. And one more thing about this specific topic, why I'm asking you to focus on urban contexts and farming contexts is because there's actually an incredible example for nature-based solutions that they've just started implementing in Australia. And it's a type of seaweed that is like growing in the ocean and stuff. And then when they take that type of seaweed and they feed it to cows, it reduces the emissions that cows let out by 80%. So just adding something to a cow's diet, it's actually very, very cheap, can actually reduce emissions in agriculture by 80%. So that's absolutely incredible. It's easy, it's efficient, it's cheap. And all of those things are things that you can convince a negotiator to add to text. Next slide, please.
Luji, time, please.
Okay, so these are the additional resources. There's some podcasts, some shows and documentaries, and like for articles, I just think you should read the UNFCCC website documents. these are things that I personally use to get information. And something that I'm going to leave you with is that at a COP, as a young person, you usually don't have any advantages except for your brain and your research. So make sure that you go in, you're well educated, you know what you're talking about, and you have enough information to make a solid point, because people are going to argue with you. They are going to try and undermine you. So make sure that you have some kind of defense that you can use, which is usually only your brain. And yeah, thank you so much. That's the end of my stuff. And now on to Jen.
Hello, friends, folks, and family. It's great to see you again. I'm very happy to be here again on this Global Youth Climate Training Program. Now taking a new position, being the youth, this year's Youth Negotiators for the Climate COP. And well, I wanted to start my presentation. I don't know if we can still put some slides there. I added them last night, but I'm pretty sure they're still, they'll go there.
You can share your screen as well.
I can share my screen as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to start because I was in your position, being a youth observer, trying to engage, trying to influence the process as much as can, trying to shape the pathways towards having a habitable planet to live on. I guess we can all agree that that's where you want. So I wanted to give some advice on preparing to engage at the climate conference, particularly that you're not alone, and it might be super overwhelming to go there and see all these things that are happening at the same time. I was very confused on what was happening, so I highly recommend you to engage with the children and youth constituency early on. And if, like other speakers said, if you're gonna follow a specific topic, try to get as much informed as possible. And what we do usually in the constituency is also build this kind of like position papers to inform us of what the previous decisions are, what the context is, what are our demands that have been built throughout the process. Yes?
But can you use your speaker instead of your AirPods? You're kind of unclear.
So, can you hear me better now? Maybe it was the fan.
Yeah, I think it's definitely better. I'll see you in the chat as well.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's kind of hot here, climate change, you know. Yeah, so so it's very important that you don't go alone, but go with your tribe, go with your organizations, and kind of like build an agenda to influence negotiations. But also, I think it was very important to also highlight that negotiations are not the only thing that is happening at COP. And Luji mentioned one of the High Seas Treaty, for example, which is a multilateral agreement at the same time that is not like part of the UNFCCC, but it's definitely very important to safeguard our most critical ecosystem, which is the oceans. And in that sense, just to make clear that there's so many things happening at the same time, and we are critical players, political players that can push for more ambitions in the negotiations. So I highly recommend you to not just follow the negotiators after the negotiations, because they'll be super tired, and it's all everyone's super tired at that process. And we're people, we're all people, and the process is about the people. Is that you also can use as much as you can the space around the pavilions, around the national focal points, you know, people that work on ministries and so on, that actually can make things happen on ground. And in that sense, trying to build alliance, try to build up your network, and slowly, you know, try to make the day better for these people that are super stressed and trying to make things happen as at the same time. Remember that we're all. So this section is called like from protest to proposals, but it essentially said understanding that we are we from the constituency, we have opportunities to give interventions, and you have to prepare them beforehand. So make sure to get your ideas put up together, but also to participate in events. I remember in COP27, there were so many side events that. Can you hear me? Yeah. that we just improvised there in the moment. We were following different pavilions to try to get a spot there, and that actually worked. So okay. Yeah, essentially, well, my God. Okay. So also understand that there are opportunities that you can have for different stakeholders to have, have a bilateral with them, ask them questions, maybe after the interventions, follow them that could also lead to a lot of action. And there's also opportunities for press statements and exhibitions, and the informal informals, which you will see negotiators walking on the hallways and having discussions. But also actions and demonstrations, these are highly powerful at the same time, and sometimes even members of parliament join some of these actions, which are incredible. And a typical day would look like this, when you have really early meetings in the morning, coordination with the constituencies, drafting intervention, tracking negotiations, bilateral side events, and receptions and parties, which are also good opportunities to lobby. And now for last, I wanted to mention this declaration that was done by the youth negotiators from last year. Some of them participating at the Children and Youth Negotiator program. And essentially what it was trying to build is build political momentum around youth engagement in the delegations under the UNFCCC. And I will paste the link in the chat so you can read it more slowly. But essentially what is from the parties, we're trying to invite the parties to the UNFCCC to improve youth engagement, and both in the implementation and the designing of NDCs, but also include youth in the delegations. You might see that something that has been built a little bit more the past years. And of course, there's different ways that the parties can do that, but we encourage to be progressive in time, essentially, and include them meaningfully in their delegations. And yeah, so one of the things that we'll be pushing in this COP is also trying to have more parties to sign up this declaration to build that political momentum. But there's also an opportunity to work with youth negotiators, and this is where we need your inputs at the same time, is how can we build more decisions related to youth engagement and the UNFCCC, and or further declarations at the same time, maybe thinking about COP30 as one of the main objectives to think of, as it will be a really important COP for to see how the decisions match the science of the APCC. So I will stop here for the round of Q&A, and we're happy to have this space to talk about this issue.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you, everybody. We're a little bit late, so we won't be taking all the questions, but I'll start with someone who they're part of the national delegation, but they were frustrated at not being able to take part of the actual negotiations. And they were wondering how they could kind of penetrate that, or how they can turn this into an opportunity to enter the negotiations.
Yeah, well, maybe I can give 2 comments on that. First, that is very, every delegation works differently. So we highly encourage to don't feel desperate and go slowly, build those relationships, build the trust in your delegation. Try to work as early as possible, so they also trust that you can follow up the positions. And if you cannot do whatever you want at this COP, there's also the opportunity to continue working with them, applying for government positions and so on. So there's not only one chance at life. Just take it slowly and try to be as a nice person as possible. Maybe Amy want to say something?
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. Agree. I think there are 2 routes. I think the first, Johny and Marie-Claire mentioned it, but going through a focal point. So if you just type in UNFCCC focal point for your country, there will be an assigned focal point. That route generally will be if you're part of civil society and you want a meeting with someone in the negotiating team. So that's the lobbying route, is the first route, the UNFCCC focal point. The second is to navigate your government's ministry. That may be the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, it may be the Environment Ministry, it may be the Climate Ministry. Figure out which ministry it is and how you can get in. And I'm very transparent that it took a lot of hard work to break into UK government, and I very much come from a working class background, and it wasn't easy, and it's definitely not, it's not for everyone. But if that is something that you want to do, go on LinkedIn, find someone who works in that ministry, send them a message, and start to navigate the application process. That would be my advice.
Okay, I'm so sorry. The next question is, how do you believe young people can have a more significant influence on a climate policy and decisions at COP?
I think I can take that question. Okay, so play the long run. Maybe you won't have influence at this COP, but what you do at this COP and the connections that you make at this upcoming COP can have an influence on the next COP. It's about having a plan, a strategy, having specific demands, really, really specific demands, and then recognizing that what you want to happen isn't necessarily going to happen immediately. It might happen over a longer process. So just be patient, follow up with negotiators, and then you'll be good. Or if you want to have an impact at this COP, like Mary Claire and Amy said, reach out to the country focal points starting from now, because the sooner you start working on something, the more time you give them to prepare internally with their governments and their groups. And yeah, that's all.
Great. And then how can we address contentious issues with negotiators while avoiding immediate negative reactions?
That's a very good question. I'm happy to start to tackle that. The others can fill in. There are certain topics, I think, that are too contentious and complex to just bring up in a corridor conversation. So, for example, the new collective quantified goal is very complicated. There's a lot of toxicity around it. There's a lot of competing suggestions. So I think it goes back to the point that Luji made very well in her presentation, which is be very, very specific about your suggestion and make it a positive one. So try and make your suggestion way into the conversation the least contentious route possible. That would be my suggestion. So a nature-based solution or a small addition to text, which is likely to be well received by the negotiator, but I'll let the others come in with anything else.
Okay, and then a really good question, I think, is what suggestions do you guys have for youth new to the climate space in general to be aware of and break into opportunities, especially since many spaces would already have their in groups?
Okay, first of all, be educated, like I said. Second thing, follow accounts on social media that post about certain opportunities. They give updates about what's happening in the pavilions and not just inside the negotiations. So the more updated you are about random things happening, the more opportunities you can see. So for example, me and Augustin, I think it was last COP, we found out that someone from the World Bank was speaking at an event, and then you go to that event and then you get to speak with the person from the World Bank. It's just about planning your engagement, seeing who you want to meet, who you want to network with, and being updated with social media really, really helps with that.
Great. And then the carbon footprint of COP is already really high with all the flying around. Is there a way to engage in a net zero or more sustainable manner?
We are working on that.
Yeah, and there is something you can always offset. So if you're planning to attend a COP, you can offset your emissions, and flights usually tell you how much you're going to be emitting. And they usually have offset programs as well. But you don't have to do it with them. You can do it with a company that you choose. So for example, we have someone called Juan Pablo in the GYC, and he offsets his emissions and stuff with a tree, like a forest, a reforestation company in Mexico. So that, for example, is an example. But yeah, I think that's like the mechanisms and things that you have now.
And then I think our last question is, did you encounter any perspective changes from moving from an advocate to a negotiator? You all mentioned how negotiators are more tired, so you're more hesitant to engage with them at specific moments, for example. Are there any other examples of that?
Maybe Amy can say that. At least me, this is my first year becoming negotiator, so I don't know how much that would change.
Yeah, I'm trying to give an answer that isn't too jaded. I think when when you engage in negotiations from a government perspective, your expectations are a lot lower because you realize how slow of a burn the UNFCCC is, how wide the conversations go across the climate system. The new collective quantified goal this year, it's been an ongoing diplomatic conversation since the 100 billion goal. It's been years and years of conversations and diplomacy and analysis. So yeah, I think you develop a lot more patience and a longer term horizon, which is obviously devastating because we're already at 1.5 degrees. But yeah, I would say more jaded. That being said, the process is still absolutely worth engaging in, to be clear.
I have something to add on that, and then I'm gonna ask like you guys a question as well. So the thing I'm gonna add is, for example, if we're gonna talk about like the Egyptian context and stuff, we had like youth approach us with a document about loss and damage, for example, and we took that document and we couldn't really like say out like, not couldn't really, gonna try and find the right wording. So we didn't really take it and be like, oh, this is what we're representing, but we took the document and we stood up and we intervened at one of the sessions and we said, we've been approached with this document from the youth. Can we all review it? So it's just kind of a channel. So you can ask a negotiator to be a channel for you instead, and that might work out. And yeah, that's the answer for that. And something else, Amy, Mary Claire, Johnny, we'd love to invite you guys back for a session in November, which we're gonna have on something called Gather Town. It's gonna be kind of like interactive and stuff. So we'll send you an email with more details. And if you're interested, that would be great.
Okay, thank you all so much. We're gonna go back into the original slides for a sec and tell you guys who our next speakers are, and then we're gonna move into the breakout session.
Can I add something?
Go for it.
Super short. Guys, remember that this 26th of September, the Race to Accelerate Renewables in the Global South webinar is taking place. You will receive the message right now from the Oxford side. So feel free to register and attend, because as all of these amazing youngsters just shared, the more you learn, the powerful you are and the wiser you get. Let's go back to the slides. Sometimes it feels like I have something prepared, but everything just comes out.
Yeah. So our next session is on September 19th. It's the fossil fuel phase out session, which I think a lot of people wrote in their applications that they're super excited for this one. So we're all very excited to present it. And I'll let Augustine read out our speakers.
Sure thing. Next session, 19th of September, we will have Moy Wikita from my country, Ecuador. He's the project coordinator of the Waponi Amazon project. He's quite famous on Instagram, and will be good to hear from him from first. They are in the first line combating climate change. Then we have our GOAT, Alexis McGiver, Net Zero Integrity Manager, Oxford Net Zero, GYC Training Program Director, and finally, and not least, Navrovs Dubash, Professor at Public and International Affairs in Princeton University. Amazing speakers for the next session. Come and learn about fossil fuels phase out and the fossil fuels company commitments. Back to you, Mary.
Now it's everyone's favorite time. It's the breakout room. I am apologetic. Sorry about that. So we've got two questions for you guys this time to discuss in the breakout rooms. What are your priorities for COP29?